Welcome, everyone. We're ready to get started now. Amazing. Welcome, everyone, to the Monzo offices. Thank you for coming this evening for our International Women's Day event a few days early, but thank you for coming nonetheless. Some housekeeping admin, restrooms for women are there, men are out in the corridor there, fire exits there and there. So just so you know. Please do make yourself at home. Food has disappeared, but there's still plenty of drinks left if you want to help yourself throughout the evening. So thank you so much for coming to the International Women's Day event. It's a great opportunity to celebrate women. Historically in tech, it's an underrepresented community, and I think as a company, it's really important to us. Our mission is to make money work for everyone, and in order to do that, we need a diverse perspective in order to build a product that works for a wide variety of people. Tonight we have three amazing speakers. We have Charlie, Ella, and Izzy. Charlie's going to kick us off tonight. Actually, I should introduce myself as well. My name's Emma. I work at Monzo. I work leading our organizational scaling team. So hello. So we'll kick off tonight with Charlie. So Charlie Brinkhurst-Cuff. She's our keynote speaker tonight. She's an award-winning writer, the head of editorial at gal-dem magazine, the editor of Mother Country: Real Stories of the Windrush Children, which came out last year. Her writing has appeared in lots of different places, including The Guardian, the Financial Times, Dazed, and Vice. Charlie won the Georgina Henry Award for Innovation in Journalism for her work on gal-dem. So please join me in welcoming Charlie up here.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good. Awesome. So I just wanted to start off actually by talking a bit about the history of International Women's Day. Does anyone know where it came from? Just like stick your hand up if you do. Like where it started. Anyone? Yeah, see, I didn't either. And then like yesterday I Googled it and I was like, wow, okay, this has got a good history behind it. So it actually started, or it was celebrated for the first time in 1909. So almost exactly 110 years ago to this day. And that particular celebration was in honor of the 1908 garment workers' strike in New York, where women protested against working conditions. And for me, it was good to sort of learn that International Women's Day has always had a bit of a radical backbone. So today I'm going to use that legacy to spotlight some women's stories that it's unlikely that you would have heard of before. So another question for you guys is, up until last year, who here had heard of the term or knew about the Windrush generation? So you guys knew before 2018. That's good. Awesome. So I think it's probably safe to say that before 2018 and the Windrush scandal broke, the Windrush generation wasn't a commonly known phrase outside of the British Caribbean community. But like many other British Caribbean people, I've been aware of Windrush as part of my ancestral legacy. On my mum's side, my mum is Jamaican and possibly Cuban, we're not really sure, for a long time. And Windrush is a shortcut and not always a particularly accurate one for describing the mass migration of Black and some South Asian and Chinese Caribbean people to the UK from the 1940s until the 1970s, roughly. As Commonwealth citizens, most of you probably know, they were begged to come here, like literally begged. The government like made these little pamphlets and like stuck them up everywhere, and they're like, come, to help this country post World War II with labour shortages. So after the Windrush scandal broke, it was discovered by journalists like Amelia Gentleman that the government was systematically deporting Windrush-era citizens, and not long after that, I was asked to edit a book looking into the stories about them and their descendants. It wasn't the original intention of the book to censor around women, but for me as a young female journalist and editor of gal-dem, I knew that women's stories would have to make up a key part of the narrative, and it also corresponded with the title quite nicely, Mother Country. So motherhood in our society still represents nurture and love, but the UK was more of a wicked stepmother of the Cinderella variety, I would argue, to those brave enough to make the journey. They encouraged hard work and reverence of British society, all the while not extending the protections to these new residents from the tarbrush of racism and later the deportation orders served by the Home Office. So the title Mother Country then becomes a subversion as well as an acknowledgement of the importance of telling women's stories. In the Windrush context, women's stories are crucial because Caribbean matriarchs held families together, they tended to children and grandchildren, and they never stopped working to better themselves or to provide for after they came to this country. So despite the work of women like Andrea Levy, whose brilliant BBC adaptation of the long song some of you might have seen, she also wrote a brilliant book called Small Island, which is a Windrush text, you could say. Their stories have been underrepresented. And women's stories in general have been repeatedly forgotten throughout history. As Zinc, the author of the Forgotten Women History series, once told me during a roundtable for gal-dem, men do dominate history and the way that we talk about it. People really struggle to name women's accomplishments and success in pretty much all fields. So when it came to Windrush, most of us can picture images of men getting off of a ship in the famous Pathé newsreel that they played over and over and over during the Windrush scandal. And even at the time, it was reported that 400 Jamaican men had come off this boat and were here to help us with our labour shortages. Later history books also failed to sort of platform women's stories. And it's clear that the male-dominated narrative around both the Windrush boat and the Windrush generation is a patriarchal insult to the hardworking woman it blurs into its footnotes. And beyond that, it's just riddled with inaccuracies. So in reality, researchers found that women actually went on to outnumber the men who immigrated to the UK from the Caribbean during the government-defined Windrush period between 1948 and 1971. Caribbean migration to Britain was the first labour movement in which women migrated in almost equal proportions to men. So that's a huge event, on top of the fact it was the first major black migration to this country. So on the ship itself, the Windrush ship that we've seen so many images of, alongside 492 male settlers, there were also as many as 65 women settlers from Trinidad, Jamaica, and Bermuda, as well as 67 women holidaymakers and colonial travelers, and 60 Polish women traveling from Mexico. So, after all that information, what can we do about this today? I want to share with you some stories that I learned from putting together the book on Windrush women. One of them, the first one that I'm going to read, is really sad, just to warn you all, and the second one, hopefully, a bit more uplifting. So Myrna Simpson is the carefully spoken mother of Joy Gardner, who came to the UK from Jamaica in the 1960s. Joy Gardner died at her home in London during a violent, botched deportation in 1993. Her case, which has never been resolved by an inquest, shows that the deportations of Windrush-era citizens follow a pattern of hostile immigration policies that stretch back further than 2015. Myrna is still fighting for justice, and these are her words. On Wednesday, 28th of July, 1993, police and immigration officers went to my daughter Joy Gardner's flat in Hornsey, London, and broke down the door. They went in and they took her out of her bed where she had been sleeping with her 5.5-year-old son, Graham. They took them into the living room and sat on top of Joy, tying her hands with a leather belt at her sides. They strapped her legs and wound 13 feet of surgical tape around her head and face. They put a body belt around her waist and leg irons on her feet. I think she died there and then by suffocation. That's what the autopsy said. I'm a part of the Windrush generation. My first vote was in this country, and here is where I made my home and my family. I came to Britain when I was only a young woman in 1961 to pursue a better life for my children and to work. We, who are the Windrush generation, historically made sacrifices to enable British democracy to flourish. We have earned the right to have a level playing field when it comes to immigration. The hostile attitude that contributed to my daughter's death must be put in the context of the current Windrush scandal. So yeah, that's Joy Gardner's story, and I would encourage you all to look it up because it's a really awful case which has never been resolved in this country. The second story I wanted to tell you is of Charmaine Lovegrove. So Charmaine is one of the first black female publishers in the UK who started her own imprint, Dialogue Books, as part of Little Brown in 2018. A former bookseller who went from living on the streets and selling books underneath Waterloo Bridge to owning a bookstore in Berlin, Charmaine has permanently disrupted the publishing industry. And these are her words. All four of my grandparents moved from England to Jamaica, and they each had a unique journey. But out of the four, I am closest to my maternal grandmother, who came over in 1960. My mum had me when she was only 18, and it's my grandma who I remember as my nurturer. She was the first person to hold me. She cut my cord, and the very first words I ever heard were "I love you" from my grandma in her strong Jamaican accent. I can't do a Jamaican accent, it's awful. Apologies. I lived with her until I was 6, and my upbringing felt very Jamaican. I remember being planted between her legs while she did my hair, standing on a stool to help her make doughy dumplings for the beef stew every Saturday, making sure to keep quiet and out of her adult conversations, but always listening. She would wash my face, clean my nose and ears with cotton buds, and when I had a cough, splash white rum on her hands, warm them in front of the electric heater, and rub my chest. I am such a child of that Jamaican woman. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing that I could do in this life, to quote Ava DuVernay, the worst thing I could do in this life, to quote Ava DuVernay, is to not become your ancestors' wildest dreams. If there's anything I understand from being an immigrant from an immigrant family, it's that you do better. I know that I'm going to make my grandparents proud and make everything that they and their parents went through worthwhile. So when I go back to Jamaica and stand at my great-grandparents' graves and pay homage, I can say, I did it. That's how I was brought up. That's what my grandmother instilled in me. So those two stories are very powerful in different ways, I think. We can't do anything to change the history of suffering that the Windrush generation and their descendants went through, but we can tell their stories, learn from them, and practice acceptance. We can acknowledge that cases like Joy Gardner's are still unresolved and that the UK has worrying immigration policies. News stories around the Stansted 15, Shamima Begum having her citizenship revoked, and the recent Jamaican charter flight prove that. We can develop an understanding of each other's cultures and a love of people like Charmaine's grandmother, who I may not have met but still feel a deep connection to. And more broadly, we need to keep celebrating women's stories every day, because as put by Audre Lorde, I'm not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Charlie. We have a bit of time for some Q&A. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand, and Yen has a microphone that she can share with you. No? Oh. One second.
I can hear you.
I think it's for the YouTube.
Oh, it's for the YouTube.
As a female in the industry that you're in, how did you get to where you are now? Like, what was your journey in kind of getting to the editorial role at gal-dem and everything else that you've done?
Sure. Yeah, I guess my journey into journalism was pretty traditional, if I'm completely honest. I went to uni. I was the first person in my family to go to uni, and I studied really hard, but not on the right things. I spent all my time doing journalism and not doing English literature. And then after that, I sort of got a bunch of work experience and worked in a pub just around the corner from here for like a year and would do work experience during the daytime. For me, I think the key thing is that my gender and my race are not, I can't separate them. So when I think about the struggles I've had in the industry, I don't think about my gender in isolation. It's always about the multitudes of my identity that have, helped and hindered me in terms of getting to where I am. Yeah.
How did you go about choosing the Windrush stories that you chose?
Sure. It was kind of like a bit of a weird process. I love spreadsheets. So I had this big spreadsheet of like themes that I wanted to hit within the book. I had a super short turnaround, like not something I'd recommend writing a book in 2 months. So I had the spreadsheet, and I had like a brilliant person who was helping me to put the book together. And I was just doing loads of Googling, speaking to friends and family members and colleagues, and trying to get them to tell me a bit about their family history. And I wanted to make sure that, as well as having the Lenny Henrys and the Corin Bailey Rays, whose stories are completely valid and brilliant, but I also brought up stories like Joy Gardner's, which I hadn't heard before until I started researching this book. But that was very important to me. Yeah.
I was just wondering how I feel like in the UK we have a race issue and we just don't have conversations. Or from my point of view, I don't think people are comfortable having conversations about it in the positive or the negative. And I was just wondering how, in your role as a journalist, how you approach talking about race in any
Carefully.
circumstance. Yeah.
Yeah, carefully. But it's funny because I think as a Black journalist, you almost see the opposite side of that coin, because it's almost all I'm asked to talk about is race. And that's obviously partially down to the fact that there is not that many of us operating within the media industry right now, which is why gal-dem exists. We're hoping to diversify the media industry because we understand the importance of representation rather. But when I speak about race, I try and use accessible language. I'm not a person who minds having to listen to, like, as long as they're not wildly ignorant. Like, I can deal with a bit of ignorance if I feel like I can have a debate with them or a discussion with that person. And yeah, I mean, I guess I use my privilege as a educated person to try and better the world. I don't want to use that phrase, but yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Cheers. So when I learned about the Windrush generation, I found it incredibly heartbreaking that nobody has essentially taught me anything about it prior to more or less 2017. I knew about it prior to that, but not in depth. How do you go about sort of spreading the word, as it were? How do you kind of diversify and decolonize our schooling, which has pretty much left this entirely off the curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's disgraceful that it's not on the curriculum. And yeah, that is obviously something that we can continue to campaign for, or get the people who are in government to, listen to. David Lammy doing a great job. He actually wrote the foreword for the book as well, so that was nice. But yeah, I think that in terms of continuing the conversation, because the thing now is that people are aware of what Windrush is, or kind of aware of what it is, but we need to make sure that we are pushing a narrative that is disruptive around Windrush. So we're not just saying these people came over here and they did that and they're good immigrants for this reason, this reason, this reason. We have to say that, their story folds into a much wider picture of the UK's hostile immigration policy, which, as I said a minute ago, has been going on for much longer than before 2015. And also that the Windrush story folds into the fact that it's not just Caribbean people who were part of the Commonwealth. I think Ghana was got independence from the UK just a few years before Jamaica, in the 1960s or 50s, and a bunch of other African countries. So I mean, that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. I think the awareness of the term is there, but I don't think that the nuances of it are there quite yet. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
Thanks for having me.
Amazing. So up next, we have Ella Goldner. She's a co-founder of Zinc, a program finding funding and supporting tech for good. Zinc runs 9-month missions focusing on growing and encouraging startups tackling major social issues. Previous Zinc programs have focused on mental health for women and girls, creating new opportunities for people hit hard by globalization and automation, and improving quality of life in old age. She's also the co-founder of NewCo UK, which connects established companies with innovative startups. Ella started her career as an aerospace engineer before becoming a consultant in tech. Please join me in welcoming Ella to the stage.
Thank you. Kind of hard to follow you, Charlie. It's been so inspiring. So I thought what I wanted to do today is to talk a bit about Zinc, but just before I get to the Zinc part, I thought maybe I can share some practical tips or coping techniques with making really big life decisions, because I think I was I'm very fortunate to be able to be here today, and I hope kind of to share some stuff with you. But the road to get there was full of really big decisions, and I think sometimes when you face this huge thing, it feels really overwhelming, and you don't know how to cope with it. So I thought I would just share a few of those kind of big life decisions that I've made and how I've kind of come to make them. So, and that will be kind of the leading part to get to where we are today, which is kind of Zinc, and hope to talk to you about it a bit and have more of a Q&A, because I think it's going to be more interesting. So I'm Israeli born, and so I lived until I was 27 in Israel. And then at some point, I felt it was quite small. So it's kind of now, I think, 9 million people, and I thought the world is so much bigger. And my husband and I wanted to kind of go and live and work abroad. And so we made that decision. So that's kind of one thing, you set a goal, and then we were starting to scout opportunities. And then very luckily, my husband had 2 opportunities. One was to move to the UK, and the other one was to Singapore. And then we had this kind of few weeks of waking up in the morning and thinking, okay, we should move to Singapore, and then in the evening we should move to the UK, and then it's about the dog, and it's about the weather, and it's whether I'm going to have a job, and so it was quite an emotional and a big thing, and to the point that it actually paralyzes you. And should I not just? I shouldn't do it. And we're both engineers as well. So I've come up with this idea. So this is me giving you tip number 1. We had this massive Excel sheet. So I think Excel sheets are going to be a thing tonight. And basically, we've listed all the things that were kind of considerations, anything from the weather, and I'm sure you know that the UK did not win that argument. We had how far it was from home, can we take the dog, what is my career going to look like, what his career going to look like, can we save money, blah, blah, blah. So we've listed all these things. And then I did this exercise. I said, okay, now that we have the full list, you're going to give weights, how important it is from 1 to 10, each one of them, and I did mine. And then we came back and compared notes. And that was really telling, because this is a facilitation tool. Think about it this way, where you have an emotional discussion about whether your career is more important than mine, or the weather is more important than my career. And we had, we're still together, so we've managed to kind of get through it. But I think it was a really interesting way to bring to the forefront some really difficult conversations, things that sometimes feel really emotional and overwhelming. So we did that exercise, and we've actually agreed on what was the Goldner's viewpoint about those things. And then the next exercise was then, this is getting, hopefully you're all kind of with me on this Excel sheet. So imagine you have like the attributes, and you have now weights. Now we're adding complexity. So there's Tel Aviv, the UK, and Singapore. And we had to give a 10 out of 10 reference to one. So one needed to be kind of the best place for the weather. As I said, the UK didn't win. My career, his career, the dog, etc. And again, and then we kind of did some weighted analysis and kind of multiplying it. And the answer was actually, we wanted to stay in Israel. And that was like a revealing, you got like 2 weeks of no sleeping, all this exercise, fighting. But it was really telling, because what we realized is that the offer on the table was not good enough. So we thought, okay, what are the things that are really important that got really low weight on the other options, and we tried to improve them. So and eventually what happened is that I said, okay, if I get to improve my career in a significant way, that's going to outweigh everything. And so I've applied to do an MBA, and I got in, and that was kind of that kind of completely changed the matrix, and we moved to London. So that was one thing. And I guess the point here is to say, I'm a geek, I'm an engineer, that's one. But the other thing is, when you have really emotional conversations, sometimes they go in your mind and feels like really big and emotional, and you don't know where to start, and everything starts kind of coming up. So sometimes actually listing those things and breaking them down into things, and that's a facilitation mechanism for you to speak to the other person or people you're seeking advice from, and it makes it a bit kind of clearer. So that was kind of the first decision. Fast forward, MBA, got like a job, wasn't happy. So I had 2 small kids, and that changed everything. Suddenly, the way you spend your days, the hours you spend in the office, the things you do, for me, it became kind of evidence that it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I guess there were a few things that happened in one go. I went to this amazing event. It's called the Inspiration Movement. And they had these talks of inspiring people. And all I could hear is like, be courageous, take the step forward. And these are people that are talking about real life, kind of like really heavy stories, really inspiring things, and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm just unhappy about my career. But you start hearing those things, and I think then I made the decision, which was hard, and I'm not suggesting you all quit your jobs if you're unhappy, but there was this idea of just doing it. So I've decided that I didn't want to continue in media, and I took the time off to figure out what I wanted to do. And again, sometimes when you're in a situation and you're unhappy, and it could be relationships, it could be work, it could be a project, just taking a step back and not doing it for a while is really helpful, because once you're in it, it's really difficult, A, to find the time, and B, actually to have that mental space to really reflect on what you want. I was lucky enough to be able to think about it. So it's not that it happened on a day. Like, I didn't wake up in the morning and left my job. I planned it. I had small kids by then. So it was all kind of, I've planned for the day to do that, but I've created that space. And the first week I was, wow, amazing. I'm so happy. I'm free. And then the next week you're starting freaking out. It's like, what have I done? Is it the biggest mistake of my life? And I chatted with some friends. And one of my friends said, hey, Ella, you're in the gap. And I thought that was genius. It suddenly made sense. There was a term for what I'm doing, and it was in the gap. It has a beginning, it has an end. And I guess that's the second thing that I wanted to kind of say. If you're in a situation, take that perspective and put it in context of a gap. It's something that is going to have a start and an end, and it serves a purpose, which is for you maybe to figure out what you want to do about it, something. We thought of organizing in the gap dinners, which never happened, but if you want to do that, then I think it's a great idea, and I'll help you. So that was kind of the second thing. And then the third thing was basically setting up Zinc. So what is Zinc? That was kind of the process that led me to create it. So I've as part of this process of finding out what I wanted to do, all these projects came up, and in creativity, you go really wide, and there was like 10,000 things, and then suddenly things started to shut down, and you start feeling the focus, and Zinc became the thing. And I was lucky to meet my two co-founders, and we've all thought about it, that we've come from different kind of directions to it. So one other thing, the Nuco thing was the other thing. Sometimes passion projects are a great way to you do the right thing and things come back to you. So Nuco was this, while I was in the agency, unhappy about what I'm doing, and I was bored a bit. So we started creating this Nuco platform, which started in the US, and we brought it to the UK. And it was about connecting large organizations that are purposeful and mission-led with startups. But more broadly speaking, it's a one-day event now that in London, and actually, I think Tom Monzo was involved in one of our earlier versions. Companies open their doors and anyone can walk in. So you have a schedule. It's like a festival. It takes 2 or 3 days in London. So if you check out the Nuco website, I think it's happening in March. But basically, the idea is that anyone can walk in on a certain time, and one of the leaders of the company will be given a talk, behind the scene kind of talk about the company. What it did, it was a way for me to, do something I enjoyed. I love innovation. I love meeting new people. But actually, it really opened up my network to meet exciting people. I got to really get connected and improve my network, and also understand, because I was at that time still a foreigner in London, and suddenly I got involved with all these startups and the tech ecosystem. So it was a great way to have a reason to call people, because if you call them for like no reason, you have like maybe a boring job, then that's a bit awkward. But suddenly you have something really exciting that you're excited about. So I guess this is kind of another point. If you have something you're passionate about, if you can do it through work, I think that's amazing. I did it through my work. So I was able to go to my boss at the time and say, let's do it. And I got some budget and some help. But people really buy into your passion. So if you're passionate about something, go and do it. Find a way to make it happen. Make a project out of it, whether it's through work, outside of work, in your leisure time. But good things come out of it, because when you're passionate, you get people behind you. People get excited. You open up new networks, and you never know what's going to happen with it. So I thought that was a really cool way to just kind of figure out what I wanted to do. So that was kind of part of the process. So then fast forward, not doing media anymore, figuring out what I wanted to do, and then Zinc came along. And basically, we've come to it from different perspectives. So I've come with the engineering kind of innovation side. One of my co-founders is a VC, and he was thinking that actually we're investing a lot of money into entrepreneurs, and people are working on solutions that are not necessarily the most important pressing problems in the world. So can we use what we know about entrepreneurship and resources to try and get people to work on things that really matter? And then Paul, my other co-founder, he worked in the government for a lot of years, and he said, look, I tried to fix those things from inside. So thankfully, we have people that are doing a great job in the government now, but it's not likely going to be the solution. So we need to find different ways to solve those big problems. So we started Zinc 2 years ago with the idea that we want to take a mission-led approach to the problems in the world. So again, going back to this idea that if something is too big, it's too overwhelming, you don't know how to address it. If we broke down those big problems into missions, like women's mental health, for example, was the first mission. Now we're looking at communities that were left behind or hard hit by automation and globalization. And the next one is looking at kind of the aging and how we add 5 years of high quality to later life. So we're trying to break down those big societal issues into things that people can relate to. And then we bring together entrepreneurs. We give them 9 months to find out who they want to work with and what they want to work on, and then help them develop the product and the business. And the idea is that they come on the other side and they have a tech commercial business that is actually mission driven. So what I've learned in that journey is that you just do it. We've sat together. We thought, are we going to do it? We had like a little deck. We got a few, yay. And then it was basically Paul and I sitting looking at each other. So we've created this landing page. We put a Twitter handle. We start asking for people to apply, and suddenly you see people applying, and you're thinking, okay, there is definitely something out there. People are interested. There is talent. There are entrepreneurs who want to do that. So it's just you just have to commit. You put it out there. You try. Sometimes we do things they don't work. We fail, but we learn. So we started the first program. We had 16 companies that were created on the back of that first 9 months. 88% of them have a female founder, which I'm very, very proud to say. And now we're in the middle, kind of about 2/3 of the way with the second cohort. Our average age is 34, so it's really interesting to get people in their 20s, people in their 60s, a balanced mix of men and women. We have 1/3 non-white, 21 nationalities, 20% of people relocated to the UK even after the B word had happened in terms of the decision, and still they thought it was a good place to come and start a business, so which is really exciting, I think. And that's the idea that if you take a mission-led approach to life, I think it's exciting. People get motivated, they get passionate, they care about it. I think the entrepreneurs that are working on things that really matter have this resilience. They care. They last longer. We're called VC. We're not really an investor. We invest in people. But from my perspective, actually, those founders are people worth betting on, because there's always a story. Someone does it because it's their mental health, their partner's mental health, their mom's, their sister, their daughter. Now people working on issues that are close to their heart, and that means that when things get really tough, and they will, because we know on the entrepreneurial journey is full of ups and downs, and it's really hard. Those people will stick to the end because it matters. You work on things that really, really matter, and they're going to change people's lives. So that's kind of where we are today. By the way, we're actually literally across the street. So if you want to check out, we have events, we have show and tells coming up from April onwards, so you can see the entrepreneurs kind of telling what they're working on or showing. We also have meet and greets, so we're going to start recruiting shortly for the next cohort. So we're going to start that program on the 30th of September. So we're actively now recruiting for that. So you can check out on our website what events we have and what programs we run. So I just wanted, I guess, to kind of go back to the beginning to say, whatever you're dealing with, and I think we're all dealing with lots of big decisions and big choices. So just think about how to get through that, and maybe it's worth even sharing. I don't know if we can use some of the time now for people to share some things that they've used, techniques that they've used, because I think it's really helpful. Some people really give you a tip or say something that really helps you because you're now stuck in that moment, and suddenly you go, oh, that was really smart. I wish I thought about it or knew about it. So just wanted to share those, inspire you, because I'm really happy where I am now. It's hard like hell, but I'm really happy because we have an amazing, diverse entrepreneurs on our program. And I think what we're doing really matters. And I hope that those companies will go and change millions and millions of lives. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Ella. Again, we have some Q&A. I see a hand up already over there in the corner. Maybe we'll do this one first just because I'm closer with the mic.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ella. You mentioned that you have a child or children, and I was just curious how you and your husband discussed parental leave? Did you build an Excel sheet? Like, who decided to sort of stay home? Did you split up the domestic work and like who was going to put their career first, etc.?
It's a really good question. So we have twins to make it really hard. I think we had this discussion. So at the time when we had the kids, I was still working in the agency. So I took the maternity leave, and also my husband still has, and at that time also he had his own business. But when I thought about starting something new, so before Zinc, I had other entrepreneurial ideas while I was on maternity leave, by the way. And I was about to go back to work, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to go back to work. I'm just going to start this thing. And this is the other thing: just talk about your things with people, because they all have point of view. And sometimes you hear things, and you hear the things you need to hear. At that same week, when I was starting to think about fundraising, and I was like, I'm not going to go back to work. Two different people, my best friends and a mentor of mine, were telling me I'm completely nuts. And I have two small kids. They're 6 months old. I have a husband who has his business, and I'm being really selfish, which I think was true. So at that time, I parked my ambition, and I said, okay, I'm going to go back to work. And the first day I was back, I thought, that's not what I want to do. And so I took actually the next 18 months to plan that. Financially, I was saving money because I knew it's going to take some time until I can actually draw a salary. I didn't want to put pressure on myself to start working, but I actually wanted to take time off. And also, so that was kind of, I was very aware of what I was doing, and therefore I could also be more for the kids at that point. At this point in time, it's definitely, my husband has taken kind of a bit of that kind of pressure and stress, and he's very, we're sharing, but I think sometimes he's now taking more of that. And that had been a conversation again that we had, and I said, okay, if I'm going to do Zinc, what it means, I'm going to be out in the evenings, I'm going to work long hours. Are we up for that as a family? And I think for those in the room, also choosing the right partner is a huge decision. Probably not one for Excel sheets, but choosing the right partner who's going to support you on your journey. And sometimes, you don't know what you're going to want when you start the journey, but it's having that partner that is going to be able to accommodate your crazy thoughts or ideas or ambitions. And, we've supported each other throughout the way. So at some point he had his ambitions, and so he took a year off and he decided what he wanted to do, and I was supporting him. So I think it's finding that kind of person that is able to do that, and you kind of work together as a team. So, but it's not easy, by the way. I haven't cracked it.
Hi there, Izzy, thank you so much. It's really inspiring. From a social entrepreneur, it's really cool to hear someone else who's going for an up and down journey. I have a question. How did you decide which 3 missions and which 3 issues you were going to choose?
Sophisticated algorithms, but I think the way we think about it, so the criteria for us is an issue that touches at least 100 million people in the world. So we're looking at the developed world to start with, where innovation, there's room for innovation and unmet needs. And it's a big commercial opportunity because we really think about those companies working in a commercial way, which is part of our thesis, is if we want to drive change, we need to think in a commercial way. So these are kind of the hard criteria. Then we're also looking for things that we know there's already awareness of. So mental health, now it's a big topic, and we were here at Monzo actually running our Mission One Connect event last week, which I think, the work that Tara does and you guys do is amazing and inspiring. But 2 years ago, it wasn't the mainstream conversation, but it was definitely a thing that was picking up, and people were starting to talk about mental health. So what we're trying to do is also find things that are already people are aware of, they're talking about, but there are not enough solutions. So by the time those companies come out, then there is this kind of high demand for solutions. The same with, and maybe this, this is now me, because every time we run a mission, all I can read about is things related. Now everything is about the future of work and jobs being made, people made redundant, and how AI, what is going to be the future of AI. And that was very timely with the second mission. And now the third mission is all about kind of aging and how we're going to live for longer, but what are we going to do in terms of how we're going to work and where we're going to live, and our chronic diseases and dementia and stuff. So we're trying to pick up things that are already in the conversation. We're not trying to create new conversations, but where we feel there are not enough solutions, where we can make a difference by launching these companies to the world that are going to try and solve those issues. So,
any other questions there? We have one. Oh, sorry.
Hi. Thank you. Yes, it was very, very inspiring. So I just have a question about how practically, so maybe I'm not very familiar with Zinc, and it's quite interesting, but during that 9 months where the entrepreneurs effectively, I guess, put together their project, what do you do, your co-founders, what do you actually, how do you help them? What happens during those 9 months? Yes.
Well, maybe you'll have to come in and we might not lead you out. So what happens is the first few weeks we have a boot camp. So we try and help people level kind of get everyone on the same page in terms of understanding whether it's things around entrepreneurship, things around the domain. So we had lots of speakers coming to talk about mental health issues. And it's also an opportunity for people to bond. So we have some social events and techniques to get you to meet everyone in the cohort. And then the next few weeks are really all about people trying to match themselves with other co-founders. So there is a process that helps with that, facilitates that. But basically, people work with other people because what they're trying to do is to figure out two things: who they want to work with and what they want to work on. So in the next few weeks, they basically spend their time testing different relationships and testing different problem areas. And then gradually that starts to stabilize to the point that now, kind of 6 months in, they have most people have landed on the team, the problem and a product idea and some traction with users. So they're testing their ideas. And in the end of March, basically some of them, those that are on mission, that have shown enough traction, that there is a solid kind of business idea that we feel there is a big enough market opportunity, will become portfolio companies. And then they have 3 months where we really work with them on accelerating that development, but also helping them start thinking about their funding and their runway, because after those 9 months, basically they're out in the world. If you are an entrepreneur, if you're gonna do anyway, start a business, then it's a great opportunity because you get opportunity to meet other people. We also have 100 fellows. So these are experts who come and provide office hours and workshops, but work with the people on developing their ideas, and they do it for free. So they really want to help people. They do it just because they believe in the mission. We also have coaches. So we have each founder on the program gets a coach, which is another thing. I think what we've realized, it's an emotional journey. It's a really hard journey, right? And a lot of early stage VCs say they invest in teams. So they say the only way to, we invest in the team, we believe in the team and the vision and the mission. But actually all the support is around resources and operational stuff and product. But actually the assets, the only thing that is going to make or break it in the first few years are the founders, whether they're going to be able to take it and grow it enough until you have a significant business, and then that kind of goes on its own. So coaching is a big element of what we do now as well. So people come on the program and they get all this support in terms of expertise, in terms of coaching. There's a bit of curriculum and workshops, and just work with us. We work with them. We become part of their team to try and help them progress to the kind of next stage. And we provide stipend as well.
Hi, incredible story. My name is Melissa Wells. I'm the founder of an organisation called Women Like Me. And right now we're not sustainable, but the group is growing in popularity. We get together and talk about racism and gender inequality issues in the tech space and in the creative industry also. I feel like, personally, I'm feeling a lot of pressure to scale and to become sustainable. Did you feel that pressure? And how do you know when your passion is becoming something bigger? Yeah. How do you deal with, the pressures of entrepreneur life?
I think what I had realized, for example, with Newco, that it was not going to become, I tried to think, me and my co-founder, who was my boss at the time, we were thinking about, can we make a business out of it? We tried a bit different models. We realized we couldn't. So it had become a vehicle for me in a way to experiment and build networks. But I think there is, and I'm happy to chat, but I think you have to kind of think about how can you grow the thing that it becomes beyond you, whether it's through commercial kind of sustainability. So can you create a business model, or can you grow movement? In my case, for example, one thing, when I knew I was not going to be working in advertising anymore, and I knew I'm not going to have access to the resources I used to have, and I wanted longevity for Newco, I went to LBS and I said, hey guys, we have this asset. It already has a brand. We've run it for, I think, 2 or 3 years by then. And we said, is there a way actually that that you guys want this? I will support you for the first year, give you all the assets, and then you run it on your own. And I think so that was my way of sustaining the NewCo initiatives without that having to be relying on me. So I found a partner that thought that was really useful to us. So maybe there is a brand or organization that you really hit their kind of CSR stuff, or the network that you have created and the content that you had created is going to be really valuable for them. So a way to sustain the business without actually having to find commercial revenues, to find that kind of business and go and pitch yourself to them and say, look, I've created that. I know how to do it now. Let me give it to you and you grow it, because those organizations will have people, events teams, stuff like that. So that's how I did it with NewCo. And with Zinc, we designed it to be commercially kind of sustainable so it can grow and become big. I hope. We'll see. We're still on the journey. Thank you. Ta-da!
Are there any last questions for Ella? Oh, that's a couple.
Hi, thanks for that. What do you think the next program will be for Zinc?
We have a fourth kind of program, and it has a question mark. So one thing we're really passionate about is the environment, obviously. I think from our perspective, we're still figuring out what's the Zinc perspective, because one of the things we're trying to do is around behavioral change and social sciences. And so all the companies that are coming out of Zinc, one of the other things, the other support we give them is working very closely with their research. We have a chief scientist, and her role is to help make sure the companies are grounded in evidence, so interventions around mental health, or even now, what's the theory of change that you have in the heart of the product you're designing? And we're still figuring out, can we do the same with the impact on our kind of environment and the planet, and what is kind of the behaviors that consumers and users can have versus what is done on a kind of more policy, government, corporates level. So we're still doing research into that and figuring out what's our angle, because we want to make sure that we're able to deliver against that. But if you have any suggestions of other big issues that we should be thinking about, then come to me. But we still left the fourth one undecided yet, so we have some time.
Thanks, Ella. Great story. My question's kind of tied into the last question around what's next for Zinc. So I know you're currently working with startups in developed countries. Would you consider working with startups in developing countries? Because I think there's a lot of opportunities out there.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think we're not limiting it. So the way we think about it is that the users and the companies that we start in this kind of program, they need to be able to address issues that are currently kind of experienced in the developed world. But if it's applicable to anywhere in the world, that's kind of fine. We're not like, I guess it's just the sharpness and the focus, because I think, and by the way, I think there's like in some cases much more innovation in some aspects of, especially around social enterprise in developing markets. So we're actually, sometimes we go and look for inspiration and examples of, microfinancing. And there's a company that came out from the first mission around fertility and parenting. And actually there's like, someone sent me an amazing example about mobile kind of, basically mobile labs for pregnant women. And that is designed in such a low cost, because it has to be kind of taken on the back and into villages. And if you could apply it in a developed world, actually it really lowers the cost of people having to go to A&E and having private kind of checkups, and people can come to your place. So I think there is definitely a dialogue there. It's not we don't have a point of view about in and out. The focus for now is the developed world, but it might change over time. I think as we grow, we want to do more and tackle more things and eventually make an impact in the world. So probably it's going to come at some point.
A great initiative, and I just wanted to ask you, because I think I have to apologize. I don't know for how long Zinc has been established and how far you are, but I was wondering if you have any success stories you can share, any of the startups or entrepreneurs we might have heard of.
Yeah, I don't know that you've heard of them just yet, because the first cohort just graduated a year ago, and I think the first public launch of the first brand was about 2 weeks ago. It's called Adia. But the companies that came out of Mission One, so one is Adia, looking at the kind of fertility journey for women, especially women that are now delaying, career women were delaying our the start of a family to later kind of age, and that comes with lots of issues. So they're trying to tackle that. We had one that looked at young women's self-confidence. And their insight they had was that your self-confidence is very much related to your relationship with sex. And so they're called Furly, and they're creating a new product that is all about kind of content and audio content to help women understand what gives them sexual pleasure and be able to communicate that. We have a company that is looking at the corporate level, so working with organizations about how they can use their well-being budget to actually be spent on mental health solutions. So they've created this platform where, as an employee, you go on, you log in, you have a few questions, so they help you analyze and diagnose what kind of needs you have in terms of mental health, and then they recommend solutions, and you can use the employer's budget to deliver against that. So that's called Better Space. They're all on our website, by the way, if you go to zinc.vc/mission-1. Another company is looking at the pill. So I don't know how many of you had the pleasure of taking the pill as a young woman. It's actually trial and error. So you go to the GP, they'll give you a prescription. You come back 3 months later, and you have all these like side effects, including mental health kind of issues, hair issues, etc. And then they switch and switch until they get to the right pill. So this women had found evidence to suggest that actually, if you do a bit of testing before, you can recommend the right pill that will fit your personal profile, and that will actually prevent some mental health issues and all the other side effects. So that's another one. So there are a lot of them. One of them is called Onigo. It's actually up and running, so you can go and do an experience in Hyde Park. It's a 60-minute experience. It's like Escape the Room meets Pokemon Go. But the insight there was that actually, as a preventative mechanism, you want to be socializing and you want to be active. And so they started creating these experiences where people go outdoor, do some stuff. There's like a puzzle. You have 16 minutes to solve the puzzle. I think there's a Detective Goldner there. But if you go play Onigo, they're up and running and they've tested it. So they've done, I think, 2 games. But the idea is to get this kind of idea that people will go on an ongoing basis and be outside, socialize and exercise. And so these are a few examples. I hope it gives you a sense.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ella.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick 10-minute break before our last talk with Izzy. So if you want to grab another drink, or the restrooms are over in the corner there. If you can be back in your seats, and about 10-2 would be perfect. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. So we have our last speaker of the evening, Izzy Obeng. She is the founder and director of Foundervine, an inclusive startup community for young early-stage entrepreneurs. Foundervine helps entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds build startups from scratch by bringing them into a support ecosystem that includes knowledge, mentorship, and access to funding. She's also enterprise manager at Queen Mary University of London, which includes running their Q Incubator program. She has a background in consulting and serves as a trust for Parkrun. So please join me in welcoming Izzy this evening.
Hello, everyone. Oh, we'll do that again. Hello, everyone. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So as my lovely host mentioned, I am Izzy Obeng. So I'm the founding director of a non-profit called Parkrun, and we help underestimated founders build startups from scratch by turning corporate offices into pop-up entrepreneurship labs for 54 hours. And I thought I'd tell you a bit more about how Foundervine came about and kind of my background, how I came to be here today. So definitely not someone who thought they were going to be an entrepreneur. And when people say it to me, I'm kind of like, oh, right, oh, yeah, I guess I am. So I started my career in consulting, and at the time I was doing lots of mentoring and coaching with young people who were interested in going into business or going into professional services. And often the sort of stories and the issues that they had were quite similar. So they were fantastic on paper, but when it came to the what you might call the soft skills, in terms of sort of public speaking, in terms of being in front of people, in terms of building relationships, there were sort of the same challenges that they had over and over again. And these problems are more acute when it came to young women and people of color. So I was really interested in diversity and inclusion. I was really interested in entrepreneurship, and I was really interested in sort of economic growth with regard to Africa in particular. I'm Ghanaian by background. And I knew I wanted to leave, but didn't quite know what I wanted to do until I had the opportunity to do a TEDx talk. And I did it on the future of entrepreneurship in Africa. I argued that for too long, the narrative when it came to economic growth in Africa had been dominated by a few key players. So you had your international aid organizations, you had your leaders who were exceptionally old across the continent, and you had celebrities, particularly in the 90s and early thousands, who meant well but didn't really know, what the continent needed. And there was something that happened when it came to digital and the kind of, advancements in tech across the continent, where young people, armed with nothing but laptops and basic knowledge of coding, could build startups from scratch. And so we had a situation where the new players in Africa's economic growth are millennials. And my argument was, it was more of a pitch, and I was pitching that there were three types of millennial in particular who held the keys to Africa's growth. You had your globalist, so much like the people in this room today, born outside of the continent, but really interested in global development and global growth. You had your returnee or your repat, so someone who was maybe born on the continent and left in search of education or work and came back and has that unique understanding of, building in a more developed country and understanding of the local context. And then you had your Afropreneur, so someone who's hustling on the ground despite major infrastructure challenges and, access to information not being readily available. So those three types of millennial together held the keys to Africa's growth. And the idea for Foundervine was born out of this need to create the ecosystem in which they could interact with each other, grow together. Foundervine it was a network of people who could, let government know when they needed to take a step back and when they needed to lean in a bit more. A platform that could provide access to thought leadership that was specific to the continent, so they didn't rely on information that wasn't tailored to the local context. It was meant as a way to bring people together, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I also realized that when we are talking about entrepreneurship and we're talking about people of color and women in different countries, for example, I went to South Africa, did a similar talk there, and they thought that their challenges as young Black entrepreneurs in South Africa were South African challenges. And speaking to entrepreneurs in the US, and they thought theirs were African American challenges, and talking to entrepreneurs here, and they thought theirs were, Black British challenges. The challenges are all the same. And so we see ourselves as a network that bring people together. So young future founders who have interesting ideas and don't really know where to go for support, corporates and people within organizations who are looking to, build their network and support the next generation to grow. So that's kind of where the idea came from. We run a program called Startup 54. As I said, it's a sort of 3-day startup building program, and we're actually going to be here at Monzo running our next Startup 54 this weekend. And the idea is that you come in and you could be someone who just has an idea or even doesn't have an idea and nothing else. So we target people who are left out by the wider startup ecosystem. So people who are absolutely not sure how to progress their ideas, don't have the networks in place, don't have access to advice and to mentorship, and we give them the support that they need to grow across this 3 days. And then afterwards, they become part of the Vine community and sort of grow with us over the course of 6 months and onwards. So that's kind of what we do. And so for example, public speaking is something that I have not in any part of my life been comfortable with. I did the TEDx talk as like the first public speaking talk I ever did. Just going in at the deep end, the idea being if I did something like that, then I could absolutely do anything. And so for me, that was an opportunity to talk about something I was really passionate about, but it was also an opportunity to increase the visibility of women of color in particular, in these conversations. So I was going to lots of startup events, which were brilliant, and there weren't that many people who, came from my background or who looked like me on the stage. And I thought that there's something going on here. And if you look at the wider, the wider ecosystem, there's a real serious issue, not just in terms of diversity. Obviously, we all know that we're here tonight, but just in terms of the visibility of stories. And I think that's a slightly separate issue. I think too often women in our society are told that in order to be socially attractive or socially acceptable, we need to be modest, we need to make ourselves small, we need to just do our best work and work really hard, and that recognition will come somehow. And what happens then is that we do all of this brilliant work and we don't get that recognition. People don't talk about what we're achieving. And so I'm going to ask you just for a moment to close your eyes for me. Close your eyes. And I want you to think about the most successful entrepreneur that you know, that you've seen on TV, that, the most successful entrepreneur that comes to mind. And I want you to just raise your hand if that person looks like me. Okay. Oh, yes. Thank you. One hand. I want to get to a point where I ask that question and pretty much every single hand goes up. And that's kind of why I do what I do. That's why I lead the kind of career that I lead. And it's doubly disappointing that in a room full of brilliant, amazing women, a lot of you are entrepreneurs, not enough hands go up. And it's not because we don't have enough brilliant entrepreneurs building things. I know women only make up maybe 17% of tech entrepreneurs at the moment. But I think there's a real challenge in terms of the visibility of those stories. So Foundervine, Startup 54, it's about building entrepreneurs, but it's also about sharing stories and showcasing the brilliant talent that we have amongst underestimated founders. So public speaking is definitely one thing I want to see more women doing. And through our events and through our programs, we always make sure that we showcase founders, trainers, professionals who are interested in gaining more public speaking experience, but maybe haven't had many opportunities to do so. The next thing I want to see more women doing is becoming non-executive directors or trustees. So I am a trustee for a charity called Parkrun. Some of you might be park runners. Who are park runners in the house? Yes, yes, yes. Quite a few hands go out. So amazing organization. And this time last year, pretty much this week, they put out an advert where they said, for International Women's Day, we want to attract a brilliant woman to join our board. And the only condition is that you shouldn't have been a trustee before. So I looked at that ad and I thought, oh, I don't know if this is the kind of thing that I should be doing. You know, I think I was 24 at the time. I, hadn't had much leadership experience, let alone board level experience. And I thought, fuck it, let me just do it. And they interviewed 45 people, and in the end, couldn't decide between me and another brilliant woman, and both of us were appointed as trustees. You can imagine my first board meeting. It was maybe like 10 older men. It was all men, all over the age of about 45, 50. CEO, founder, and I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I don't really know what I'm doing. But I asked questions, and I had that sort of halo over my head that comes with being, new to the organization, so I could ask stupid questions. Over the last year, it's been one of the most challenging, but one of the most interesting and character building experiences of my career. And I think too many of us think in our heads when we think about non-executive directors, we think, there's this image in the head of kind of older, kind of seasoned, often a gentleman who's kind of been there, done that, and who can give back all of their wisdom that they've accumulated over the years. And what we don't realize is that as young people, often the beneficiaries of the work that these organizations are doing, we bring so much to the table. And if you're a young woman, if you're a person of color, if you are neurodiverse, if you're LGBT+, you have a responsibility to apply for board roles, because you, as someone who is empowered, you have the opportunity to actually affect policy and decision making at that level and actually make a difference and an impact on how that organization works, how that organization regards people like you, and how that organization ultimately, builds inclusive cultures and leads a very inclusive kind of growth. So I think it's really important that more of us become non-execs or trustees. The next thing I wish that more women start doing is thinking through their personal brand. So I do a lot of work on personal branding, and as I said before, sort of public speaking for me was very experimental. I'm quite introverted naturally, and I think when I started going into the entrepreneurship space, it was really important to me that that I came across as credible, obviously, but that I was interested and interesting to people. So over the course of the last few years, I've done quite a lot of speaking and writing on various subjects, but I've thought a lot about what my online and offline brand looks like. And often when I speak to young people who are looking to build their credibility in a particular field, and I've asked them what their LinkedIn profile looks like, and it's rubbish. And what I Google, Facebook is the first thing that comes up, and they haven't used it for 5 years. And I ask them what events they're going to, and they're not being strategic in terms of their thinking about what that is. And I think there's a lot we can do in terms of positioning ourselves as thought leaders in the spaces that we work in. I think that is, again, the onus is on us in particular as women to stand and be credible and be seen in spaces which are traditionally dominated by men. So the other thing I wish more women start doing is negotiating pay. So this is a really interesting one. And you look at some of the statistics around promotion and around negotiating pay. And it's this sort of widely talked about statistic that men will apply for a job when they meet only 60% of the requirements, whereas women will apply when they meet 100% of the requirements. And, both in terms of my personal experience and in terms of, what I've seen and read, when it comes to negotiating pay, I think that is, it's often the first thing that a lot of men will be thinking about, making sure they're compensated appropriately for the work they're doing. And if, the job comes in at band X, they will go too higher and they will kind of go in with that mindset of like, this is the worth that I have. Whereas women tend to, and I'm making sweeping generalizations here, so please do appreciate the nuance, but women will, tend to just be appreciative for the job that they've been given and, overly thankful and just happy to be there. And what happens is when you start out, two people of equal intelligence and equal experience start out on two different pay bands, over the course of their career, that starts to widen and widen through not asking for pay rises enough, not negotiating pay enough, not going for promotion enough, to the point where two people who are doing fantastically in their careers are being paid, thousands, if not tens of thousands, one more than the other. So I think it's really important that more of us start negotiating pay, having those conversations. And a lot of you are in roles right now where you're either thinking about leaving or you're thinking about being promoted within your role. So I think this is International Women's Day this week is probably a really good time to start thinking about how you can get your money, because if you're doing fantastic work, I heard a bit of a clap there. You're just like, yeah, I'm gonna get my money. This is a fantastic time to start asking about it. And I think sometimes there's this fear, and I think so I work a lot with entrepreneurs, obviously, who are, say, it costs me this much to do this product, but I feel scared like asking people to give me this much money. And I think there's the same kind of feeling with organizations, like, oh, I know I'm worth, this, but I feel nervous kind of asking. What is the worst that can happen? Your manager will not be personally offended if, you ask and they cannot give you a promotion for whatever reasons. You've got absolutely nothing to lose. And I think, if anything, it actually shows, ambition, and it shows a kind of competence, and it shows that you'll probably leave soon if they don't do something about it. So it's always going to be positive. And so the last thing that I want more women to start doing is turning their interest into income. So as I said, a lot of my work revolves around helping people turn their ideas, often absolutely rubbish at the beginning, into something which is commercially viable and which can earn them an income. And this can be in absolutely anything. Only yesterday, I spoke to a brilliant young woman whose mother is a cancer survivor, and she's building an app to bring the families and individuals who have been affected by cancer together. Brilliant idea. She's just doing it in her spare time. She's in her second year at university. I also meet people who just love baking brownies and who want to turn that into a viable business. And I think often, particularly when it comes to social enterprises and non-profits, and I'm guilty of it as well, when it's our passion, we kind of don't think about the commercial aspect of it from the beginning. We kind of tell ourselves, oh, really passionate about it because our beneficiaries come from this particular income bracket or don't have access to these resources, will offer our services free or heavily discounted. What you then end up doing is building something that is absolutely fantastic, that adds a lot of value, but isn't sustainable enough for you to make it full time. And we need to ask ourselves, we're really passionate about delivering what we're doing, but if you keep underselling what you're offering, if you keep not pricing it appropriately, you're not going to be able to deliver that thing in the future. So it's super important that we start one, thinking about things that we're passionate about and turning that into income. And not everyone wants to start a business. That's absolutely fine. Thinking about how you can turn that interest you have and innovate within the organizations you're in, become entrepreneurs within these organizations, architects of your own career, using what you know and the skills you have and the passions that you have to build and develop new things within the organizations you work for. All of those things are super important. And so that's my kind of wish list. I kind of thought, I just want to have a bit of a call to action and get it off my chest, because I work with so many brilliant people who aren't doing these things in particular. And so, I mean, the last thing I want to leave you with before you ask some questions, if you have any, is sort of finding a coach or finding a mentor. I think this is the kind of thing we talk about over and over again. You should have a coach, you should have a mentor. I can't stress how important that is and how just absolutely transformative it's been in my career. So I just want to actually get a sense, because if all of your hands go up, then I've got an amazing room, but how many of you actually have coaches or mentors that you see regularly? Okay, and how many of you want to be really successful in your career? Okay, so there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance there when I think mentoring and coaching is one of the most insanely positive and beneficial things that you need to do in order to progress your career. But too many of us don't have those things. And having a coach, it's not a case of going up to someone and saying like, "Will you be my mentor?" That's never the way it works. It's often just building relationships with cool people who you think are cool and whose careers you aspire to, and turning those conversations into long-term relationships that are mutually beneficial. And when it comes to mentoring, I always say that you need to be prepared to do 90% of the work yourself and only come to your mentor with that 10%. Being interested and interesting to that person, as I said at the beginning. So hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully if you take anything away from this event, you do one of those things, and if you have any questions about them, you absolutely just reach out to me and ask. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Izzy. So we have some time for Q&A. If there's any questions in the audience. One way. Both the mics. Okay, I'll do some running around.
Hello, Izzy. Thank you for your time. My name's Christina, and I wanted to know, do you know of a service that helps refine VC decks? So I'm a little bit beyond, what's your idea? I've actually drafted a 36-page deck or slide deck, which is crazy. It does need refining. It does need kind of weaning down, but I just wondered whether you knew of anyone or if there was a service that would help do that.
So I don't know how helpful I can be in terms of a kind of online tool that helps you do that. But I do know a lot of brilliant people who are in that space in my network who would be willing to have that conversation or that coffee. But in terms of like a kind of service that can do that, I'm not entirely sure. There might be someone in this room who knows of a service. We've got lots of entrepreneurs and interesting VCs. No, but I'm willing to make an introduction if that would be helpful.
Hi, Izzy. Thank you I really like your call to action. On the negotiate the pay, what are your tips? So my background is I worked in higher education and I moved into a professional services firm. And I came from a place where I know exactly how much money you can make at a given role and if and where there are opportunities to grow. And then to move into a place where it's so opaque, you have no idea, and I don't even know who to ask and how to approach that. How much money do you make being on the same level with, people around you, and how do you move and how do you have that conversation? So what are your tips having been in that world, but also with what you do now? I don't know, a couple of tips of how to start that and how to move actually that conversation, because we can all say, I want more money. I think I'm worth more. This is what I know that's happening, say, in the industry, but how do you get it with your manager?
It's a really, really good question. I think one of the most important things is just being open and honest. So I think one of the worst things, I think, culturally in our society is that we're not honest about pay, how much we earn. It's this kind of really closely guarded secret. And when you're in professional services, you'll have people who are earning literally tens of thousands more than someone just because they're in a particular team or something's happened. You don't really know the set of circumstances. So just asking people, but with people who you trust enough and just having that honest dialogue, I think is the first step. And what that helps with is actually having facts that you can go to a manager with, because when we're having these conversations, they need to be grounded in just hard facts and logics. There's absolutely no room for saying no. So you go to that manager with a clear description about how your role may have changed over time and you're being not being compensated appropriately, or how, you know, the scope of your work has increased over time, and, you know, Sally is earning 15K more and she's doing exactly the same work. And if you know Sally and John are both earning this much and you're earning that, then you put yourself in a really, really strong position in terms of asking for that. And saying no in that situation can be very difficult, I think. So I think the first step is having that conversation, finding that benchmark, understanding where your you know, where your role has changed over time and why you need to be compensated more, and then you know, having that conversation. And it may be a genuine reason why, you know, because of the nature of your team or something, but having that conversation will never ever harm you. If you feel uncomfortable asking friends and colleagues in your organization about that, other firms where people do similar work may be an option, because they will all be sort of, you know, around the same level roughly. Hopefully that's helpful.
Any other questions? Oh, a couple over here.
Hi, Izzy.
Hello.
My name's Ruth. Thank you for sharing. I feel like you've kind of summed up my New Year's resolutions in your list, but I will zone into one particular question for now. And it was around the trying to get onto board levels or non-exec roles. And that's something that I've been quite keen to do. And I'm struggling to figure out, I guess, how to step into that. Because quite a lot of the roles I've come across have been obviously looking for people who have that set experience, that set kind of background, or have certain roles. But there's clearly an opening of a lack of younger people from certain backgrounds. And they say there's a need, but then it's like, how do you meet the need if you're not letting people in? And I just wondered whether you could maybe elaborate on that, or maybe give some advice on where to look for opportunities. Is it worth starting with startups or charities as trustee roles? And yeah, just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it's almost sort of two questions there around how do you actually find these roles, and how do you then, you know, navigate whether you would be the most appropriate person for that role, and kind of maybe even convince them towards the benefits of having someone from your background in that role. I think so. There is a website for charity trustee roles in particular. I think if you Google charity trustee, I think it might, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but there is a database of, in particular, charity trustee roles. Often I find that a lot of people don't really go through that more formal route of just finding opportunities online and applying for them. They often have a personal connection to the organization. For example, for the role that I found, I had a personal connection to the founder, so it wasn't completely random. And if you've been involved with an organization, if it's something that you've been, you know, involved with, then you understand what's happening. You understand where the organization might not be doing well, or you know, being inclusive, or whatever it is, and you have the opportunity to have that conversation. So I think starting with organizations you're passionate about and you know about could be a great way. But if a kind of a role comes up online and you don't really know the people, just reaching out to a senior person within the organization, maybe not necessarily the recruiter because they wouldn't know, but someone who is quite senior on, and kind of finding out whether you'd be a good fit for the organization. So what I found is that in having conversations with other people who sit in board roles, not just sort of non-executive directors or trustees, but even school governors, is that once you have that sort of one-to-one conversation, you have the opportunity to actually kind of find out what is going on. The opportunities to become a trustee is a bit more organic and natural. And so, short answer to your question: if you're interested in an organisation, reach out to people, have a coffee, find out more, and you'll be surprised, you know, how you can work together. And if you don't end up being a trustee, there may still be opportunities to support in other ways.
Hi, sorry, just behind. Yeah, hello. Hi.
I think we're sort of gradually going through your wish list. But you talked about the importance of building your personal brand. Do you sort of have any top tips for how to start that process and how to really kind of put yourself out there?
Absolutely. So I run a whole training program on it. But so in terms of the first step, so something that I call a kind of personal branding board. And it's asking yourselves, has anyone come across the term ikigai? I think I'm saying it correctly. It's this Japanese concept, but it exists in all cultures. This kind of diamond, and it's a connection between what you're good at, what you can get paid for, what the world needs, and what your strengths are. And our personal brand and our success in whatever we do exists somewhere in the middle, the intersection of all of those things. And so when it comes to personal branding, the first step is definitely to understand, what are your strengths? What do you do really well? Think about your successes and actually list them. Too often we do some really awesome stuff all the time and we don't take the time to actually reflect on those things. What are your recent successes? What are you looking for? What does what's the end goal for you? And we all have different end goals. So you could be looking for promotion at work. You could simply be looking to build your profile. You could be looking to have a senior person within your organization as a mentor. You could be looking to do more presentations within your goals will be different. So actually articulating what those goals are, and it's so powerful actually taking the time to list what they are and thinking and looking at a board like that, thinking, okay, so I know what I am, I know what I do, and thinking through the gap that it takes to get to where I want to go, those goals, and then talking to people, having a coach or mentor, and actually working through what steps you can take to get there. So the first step is definitely self-discipline in terms of making sure that you've got all of that in place. But the second step is having an accountability partner, so someone who's going to hold you to account. And one thing I think is really cool, particularly when people make New Year's resolutions, is to email them to a friend and get them to put a note in their diary to email you in 3 months' time to ask you if you've actually bloody done it. And I think we can take the same approach to our goals and our desires in terms of our careers. So if you really, really want to do something, understand what your current state is and work with people, socialize the steps you need to take to get to your end goal.
Hi. So I was recently introduced to a distinction between a sponsor and a mentor. Sponsor being a person who sort of has the power and the leverage to actually change the sort of situation that you're in, sort of career-wise, whereas a coach or a mentor is somebody who could give you great advice but may not have the underlying resource or the power to sort of change things. How do you go about choosing a sponsor or, as you sort of talk about them, a coach that can actually help elevate your career? And what are some of the challenge and how difficult is it to do that, maybe as a person of color, who may not have the necessary network to rely upon in order to get that particular person?
It's a really good question. And I think making the distinction first between a coach, a mentor, and a sponsor. So with a coach is not going to give you advice on what to do with your career. They're going to help you process your own thinking and help you get to a point where you kind of know what you're doing. A mentor is someone who's a bit more seasoned in the career of your choice and who can give you that insider insight and kind of help you think through the steps, to offer you guidance in terms of where you want to go. And your sponsor is someone, as you said, who has the power and the clout to be able to advance your careers in ways that you wouldn't by yourself. So in terms of finding a sponsor, one thing I find the most helpful is to just create situations in which you are, one, positioned as a thought leader in a particular space, and two, have the opportunity to get in front of them. One of the best ways to do that within organizations is owning a particular piece. So if you're someone who's really passionate about gender or ethnic diversity, LGBT plus, whatever it is, owning that particular piece within your organization That could be setting up a network. It could be thinking through some thought leadership. It could be organising a CSR initiative with the local community. It could be doing a survey, whatever that is, doing something which gets you in front of that senior stakeholder and says to them that you're someone who is, architecting, like I said, their own career within the organisation, and who's really interested in, creating change at that strategic level. And suddenly, particularly if there's someone who's quite panicking about diversity, too often I speak to organizations and they're like, Izzy, we've got the gender thing down, but we have no idea about race. Stuff, and I have so many of those conversations. So if you're someone who is taking a piece of the narrative and leading on it, that's a great opportunity for them to kind of will you out, and you can be mutually beneficial to each other. So making yourself interested and interesting to them by creating opportunities to, work with them. Events are also a great way to do that. I found when I was in the firm I was in previously, I hosted lots of events in the lead up to Brexit in particular, where I got people to have sort of mock debates and different senior leaders to speak and deliver keynotes, etc., etc. That's just a great way to get in front of them. So creating those opportunities to get in front of them, I think, is often the best way to find that sponsor. And then just being really ballsy about having the conversation about your career. Look, I'm here. This is what I want to do. I'm really passionate about X, Y, Z, and I think you'd be a great person to help me advance my career. You can see what I've done. We've worked together on this. This is my background. They'd appreciate that candor. So, yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Izzy.
Hello.
I've got two questions, actually. So the first question is, I've recently became an exec board member.
Congrats.
Thank you. How do you navigate and how do you best conduct yourself when you're in a room? Because for me, because it's quite new, I'm always thinking, like, do I speak now? Or, like, what should I say? And, like, they're taking minutes, so whatever I say has to be good. And second question is, because, I have the group for women who work in tech. I was recently approached about helping people market to diverse communities, and he asked me to do all this work basically for free. So then now how do I ask to get paid for it?
So I'll start on the easier one. So how to conduct yourself in a room. Actually, I don't know if that's the easier one because it can be absolutely terrifying. It's depending on the type of board, and every board is completely different. It's quite a formal environment, and it's one in which if you are very obviously different, or you feel slightly out of place, it can be quite difficult sometimes. And I'm someone who considers myself to be fairly confident in most of the aspects of my life and my work. But the first, the second, the third time I was in that room, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And it's taken me a year to get to a point where I know what I'm there to deliver. And it's something really interesting about the fact that they advertise this role on International Women's Day, which, if you think about it and you're being cynical, it's a slightly tokenistic gesture where they saw how the board looked and that it wasn't representative. And they were looking for someone who was able to bring something maybe different to the organization. So I think part of my journey, and I don't know if it's the same with you, has actually been understanding why I'm there. And when now I understand why I'm there, I'm not going to, go on a deep dive into topics that, maybe aren't part of my skill set, and focusing on my strengths within that board and focusing on what I can offer and where I can add value has been really helpful in terms of building my confidence. But it's an ongoing process, and you are going to feel slightly strange at the beginning, but just keep going. And if you feel really uncomfortable, pull aside another trustee, go for a coffee with them. You'll probably realize that they feel exactly the same because it's a really weird environment. In terms of being paid, I think as an entrepreneur, it's like an ongoing, journey towards actually getting the value that you think you need from what you do. I think it's also really important to understand that where you do things perhaps for free, or for a smaller payment in the beginning that often over time can lead to something a lot more substantial. So, you may be doing a small piece of work with this team. It could be a research piece, whatever it is, and it's not being paid. But over time, because you've built this relationship, when they do have the funding in place to be able to, offer you what you're asking for, then you're more positioned, more better positioned than anyone else to sort of be paid for that. But I think we have a real problem in our business ecosystem with paying people. So I don't want to go on a rant because I could. So just keep pressing away at it and always ask. Always ask.
Any other questions in the room before we wrap up?
Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to kind of mingle for a little bit. And then, yeah, I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. Thank you.